Hi there. So let's talk some more about poverty. This is a continuation of lecture 1 for this week, and we're going to talk about those adjectives that I said we needed to put in front of the word poverty in order to be able to really define them or describe the lifestyle associated with the different types of poverty that exist in the world. So, the first two types of poverty that I have on this list here, you will read about in chapter 7, and all three of them you will read about in chapter 8. So, this third one is, I don't think you can find it in chapter 7. I think it's a transition over into chapter 8. Okay. So, three different types of poverty. Our key terms, our adjectives here are relative, absolute, and subjective. So let's look at relative first, because I chose to put this one first. Not that they need to come in any particular order. If I ask you to discuss them in a question or on a project or something, if I ask you to address this, you don't have to put them in any particular order. I put them in this order because relative poverty is the most common type of poverty that you will find in the United States. Relative poverty and subjective poverty is a big thing in the United States too, although you tell me when we get to subjective poverty to look at it, you'll have to tell me whether it really is impoverished at all. But that's a subjective thing, right? Subjective poverty. Okay, so relative poverty is not being able to have the average standard of living, but you are able to subsist from day to day. So you comfortably have all of your subsistence needs available to you, but you don't have a whole lot of life chances for advancement, life chances for luxury, life chances for leisure, life chances for comfort in life. So relative poverty, if you want to talk about it in terms of life chances, and it's good to practice that because you will be asked to address that question or a question similar to that on Project 3. Relative poverty, if you relate it to life chances, if you are in relative poverty, you have number one of our two different types of opportunities in life chances. You have those subsistence level needs taken care of. No problem with oxygen, potable water, food, and shelter. You've got those things taken care of. However, it's when you get to the assumptions about the average standard of living, that's when relative poverty comes in. So if, for instance, you would assume that people have within their shelter a phone or internet service or lights and utilities, running water, those kinds of life chances are not necessarily associated with proper shelter for subsistence. Those things make it easier for you to get by from day to day, but those things are not necessary for a subsistence level. So you're able to subsist with relative poverty, but you're not able to have the average standard of living. So if a kid assumes, or if you assume that most kids have a PlayStation or some kind of multiplayer games at their home, if you assume that they're going to be able to have new shoes for their feet when the old ones are worn out, if you assume that people have plenty of food in their household, then that is the average standard of living that we assume people have these things. And in the United States, the reason that relative poverty is the most common, even among the underclasses and the working poor that we described last week, is because there are so many services that are in place, whether they are governmental services or non-governmental services that are in place, food banks or housing vouchers or things like this, that enable people to subsist in the United States. It might not have, currently there is no push from a government agency or from a charitable agency to hand out Xboxes to everybody. Like, that's not something that is is part of a subsistence level, but other things like housing vouchers, reduced rent or fixed rent, food stamp cards, whatever the program is called in your particular state, food stamps, housing vouchers, food pantries, assistance with your electric bill, a levelized billing, and these kinds of things are available for people in the United States because we have worked into our governmental system. We did not leave capitalism unchecked, like Karl Marx said could happen. And if capitalism is left unchecked, then yes, extreme poverty can be part of that. But we did not do that in the United States. We have capitalism in check. And so people on those bottom two rungs of the ladder are taken care of. There is the possibility to subsist that is broad reaching in the United States. We might not all have the same average standard of living. We might not have the same resources in our home. We might have a home but no furniture in it, for instance. Furniture is not part of shelter, right? So we might not be able to have what we assume the average, do you see my air quotes, the average person has. But relative poverty is not a life-threatening situation. It just is a difference of assumed resources that somebody has. They have subsistence level, but subsistence level is usually less than what we assume people have access to in our society, what the average standard of living is. It's the most common type of unpleasant poverty that exists in the United States. Worldwide, and in the United States too, you'll see this next one in the United States also, but not very commonly because there are so many checks and balances in place to avoid absolute poverty. But absolute poverty is an extremely common form of poverty around the world. Do you see how I have this, oh, I didn't spell this right. It's a life-threatening situation. It's got a TH in there. It's a life-threatening situation, okay? So there is a threat on someone's life if they exist in absolute poverty, okay? Because the definition of absolute poverty is you can't subsist. Here with relative poverty, you are able to subsist. Subsist means to get by day to day, okay? But here you cannot subsist day to day. You do not have access to clean water resources, therefore they make you sick and you could die. You don't have access to the proper and nutritious food, and so you're not able to bring a baby to full term, or you're not able to get the nutrition that you need for your body to have an immune system to fight off diseases, or you starve if your food supply is at the lowest level in the world, and therefore you don't subsist from day to day. If you don't have access to shelter to protect you from storms, from extreme weather, these kinds of things, you are not able to subsist from day to day. So you do see absolute poverty in the United States, but it's much less common, far less common than relative poverty. I went on a trip several years ago. Gosh, I guess it's been 10 years ago now. I went to New York at Christmas time with a friend of mine, and I remember having the news on the TV in the morning when we were getting ready to go out, and the news report said that someone had frozen to death on a park bench in Central Park overnight, and they were reporting that death. And the news reporter went on to say that that guy who unfortunately died because he froze to death was only 2 blocks away from a homeless shelter that was available for him to go and have a warm bed to sleep in. And therefore, he died from absolute poverty, but there were resources for him to be able to subsist. He just either didn't take advantage of them, or was unaware, or was maybe too sickly in order to be able to get that. He didn't get the help he needed to be transported there. Who knows why? But that's an example of absolute poverty. But around the world, and I will show you a short section of a documentary we'll watch together of an example of absolute poverty around the world, because people are in life-threatening situations on a daily basis where they don't have the right to have shelter where they end up living, or they don't have proper materials to construct a shelter, or there's no proper sanitation, so people's waste is just corrupting all of the land and the water resources that are there. They get sick and they die because they aren't able to have a subsistence level. They cannot subsist from day to day. It's life-threatening. So I'm going to show you the differences in a couple of different videos that we're going to watch. I'm going to show you one about relative poverty in the United States, just a short, I'm not going to show you the whole thing, just a section of it, and then another one about absolute poverty conditions worldwide. And so you will also get another definition, or you're going to get some additional components for this definition when we watch that video together, because there are there is a definition that the United Nations has for slum conditions, and slum conditions, that's another synonym for absolute poverty. So we're going to look at that. Now, this last type of poverty that I have on the list, I forgot to write the word out, but subjective poverty, this is another one of the adjectives. This is measurable only by the individual. That's what subjective means. In my point of view, do I feel impoverished? So this is about a measurement that we make of ourselves. Do we feel like we should be farther ahead money-wise? Do we feel like we've done everything that we are supposed to do to get that job, get that salary that we wanted, but we just still don't have the kinds of resources that we thought we would have at this point in our lives? I feel poor. I wanted to have this kind of car, but I can only afford this one. Gosh, when am I going to be able to get that luxury car I've always wanted? There is a feeling of subjective poverty, the feeling of being deprived, but it's within the individual, and it's really not measurable by looking at the official poverty line, because this is way more than subsistence. This might merely mean that you are not able to upgrade to that 5-bedroom house that would be so much more comfortable. You've got to stay in the 3-bedroom one, and guests, if they come over, have to sleep on the couch. So this might be an example of subjective poverty. It's within the individual's assessment of their own condition, and it's not really on the macro scale of what poverty is compared to subsistence or average standard of living. Subjective poverty is often well more than the average standard of living. It's just, how do I feel about it? So we're going to look at these things more in depth in another video, two or three other videos, and we're also going to look at the connection that they have to something called the Human Development Index that is applied worldwide to living conditions, average standard of living, absolute poverty conditions. So we're going to go deeper into this. Please text me with questions. Bye.